Jewish Education in Media is pleased to present L'Chaim, a program that highlights the people, issues, and events of importance to the Jewish community. Now here is your host, Rabbi Mark Golub.
I'm Mark Golub, and there are many wonderful columnists and commentators in the Jewish world, left, center, right, who are offering some superb analysis and critique of Jewish life. But to my mind, the most thoughtful and insightful columnist on the Jewish scene today is Isi Leibler, whose weekly column appears in the Jerusalem Post, Israel Hayom, and on his own website, Candidly Speaking from Jerusalem, which you can access simply by Googling the name Isi Leibler. And if you care about the issues challenging Jewish life today in Israel and throughout the Jewish world, you can sign up, as I have, and automatically receive Izzy's column by email. Now here's a sampling of titles of some of Izzy's recent columns, which will give you a sense of the breadth of Izzy's interests and his courage in taking on those he believes to be enemies of Israel and the Jewish people, as well as being willing to hold Israeli leaders and American Jewish leaders to account. Here are some of Izzy's recent columns. Israel's scandalously deficient response to global anti-Semitic tsunami. And lessons from France. Aliyah is the cornerstone of Zionism. Then commenting on the controversy that erupted over Prime Minister Netanyahu's accepting Speaker Boehner's invitation to address a joint session of Congress, Izzy has written, "Should Netanyahu address Congress?" And Obama's shameless Jewish cheerleaders. Another column, is American Jewish leadership intimidated? Which Izzy says he's writing because he was, for many years, in a major leadership role as the principal Jewish lay leader in Australia for a quarter century. And many of you may also know that Isi Leibler was one of the first of world Jewish leaders to bring the plight of Soviet Jewry and the need to save Soviet Jewry to the forefront of Jewish consciousness. Then, with respect to the upcoming Israeli elections, Izzy wrote a column entitled, "A Revolting Election Campaign and a Vicious Media," and on and on and on. And Isi Leibler, I love the opportunity to say in public how one of the wonderful things that's come out of my doing, Shalom TV and now JBS, is that you're now part of my life and you're a dear friend, and you are an extraordinary, not only thinker and observer and analyst, you are a lovely person, a committed Jew, and it's an honor to always have you sitting at this table.
Wow, Mark, with an introduction like that, I wish I was standing for politics. I couldn't get a recommendation like that.
You're sweet to
Thank you
say
so
that,
much.
but you don't
I'm
really
very
mean that.
honored.
You don't want to be in politics, do
No,
you?
I don't. I could have been.
Exactly. So I want to begin by addressing the joint session of Congress and the critics of Prime Minister Netanyahu in Israel say that, number one, he accepted John Boehner's invitation as a political grandstand to help his chances on the Israeli scene in the Israeli election coming up in mid-March. And they also claim, and many people claim this in the United States, that lo and behold, he has done something to undermine bipartisan support of the State of Israel in Congress. And I don't know if you're aware of this, but on the Charlie Rose show, U.S. National Security Advisor Susan Rice said the Prime Minister's acceptance of House Speaker John Boehner's invitation has damaged bipartisan support of Israel, calling it, quote, destructive of the fabric of the relationship. You have come out pretty much in favor, supporting the Prime Minister speaking in Congress. I want to know how you respond to the critics who claim that he did it to grandstand on the political scene in Israel and that he has done severe damage to American congressional support in the Democratic Party for the State of Israel.
Let me say, first of all, that I think in retrospect, he himself would say that if he could do it again, he would do it again, but do it a little bit more intelligently, because I think there was a bit of a lot of this could have been avoided by a bit more diplomacy beforehand.
By doing what, for example?
There are ways and means of having kind of covered himself with the Democrats a little bit more than he did. And I think that is, I think his advisors said, if you go to them and ask them, they'll say no. And I think he made a mistake because they would not necessarily have said no in the same way. But the real issue at stake here is I can't read his heart. I can't read whether he did this for political reasons for himself. All I do know is one thing. He is obsessed with the fear and concern for the future of the State of Israel, for what is taking place here in the United States, the way the Obama administration is making a deal to make Iran a nuclear state. It's just a threshold nuclear state. This is something terrible. And this is happening at a time when they're saying openly that they want to destroy us and that we're a cancer and all the rest of it. Now, this is a shocking situation, and to have America promoting this, to us, it's frightening. And he is desperately looking at Congress. He could not have a better sounding board, not just to the American people and to Congress itself, but to the world.
Absolutely.
And he's hoping. He couldn't. They tell him, well, why didn't you wait till after the elections? Well, that's nonsense, because after the elections, this is going to be all over. So I would like to give him the benefit of the doubt and put everything else aside and say, irrespective of anything else, what he's doing is a wholly objective, and the Jews who are concerned about Israel should be supporting him and encouraging people to understand that this is nothing to do with bipartisanship. In fact, I regret to say that there are a number of Jewish leaders that have created the whole element by actually stating it and giving President Obama the opportunity. President Obama's not worried about the fact that he's going to speak in Congress and it's 2 weeks before an election. President Obama is worried that he's going to spoil and create an atmosphere which is going to perhaps undermine or weaken his ability to get away with giving everything away to the Iranians. Now, to my mind, he's on the side of the angels on this.
Netanyahu.
And, Netanyahu's on the side of the angels. I don't care what's in his heart. I know what he's trying to do is the right thing for the Jewish state, for the region, and for the world. Because the day will come when, if these people have the bomb, he will at least have done everything possible and be able to say he's done everything possible to stop it.
Mm-hmm. John Boehner went on national television last Sunday.
Yes.
And was asked specifically, why didn't you go to the White House and sort of run this by them before you extended the invitation to Prime Minister Netanyahu? And Speaker Boehner's answer was, I was concerned the president would try to nix it, and I didn't want it nixed. And therefore, we have the right. No one argues that Congress doesn't have the right. But since we have the right, I didn't want to, get in a situation where the President of the United States might tell me, don't do it. That would be a different kind of conflict. And now we come to what you say about Netanyahu, and maybe it would have been wiser for him to handle it in a different way. But I've wondered, and I want to know your sense, I've wondered whether in fact, Netanyahu knew from the moment he got the invitation that it was, quote, a partisan, a Republican invitation, and that he then made a conscious decision not to ask the Democrats for the same reason that Boehner wasn't asking
I think there's an element,
the president.
There's probably an element of truth in that. But his feeling was, if I go and ask them, I don't say he was right, but his feeling was, had he gone to the White House and said this, he would have had a very, very strong demand not to come and would have made it much more difficult than accepting.
Yes. And he felt it was the lesser of two evils.
Absolutely.
To accept the invitation and not worry about it and to deal with whatever fallout. Okay. In Israel, what I have seen is Isaac Herzog and Tzipi Livni have just been brutal in their criticism of Netanyahu over this issue. What's your sense of that?
I think they're going to lose a lot of votes over it. And I don't think it's going to enhance them. And I think that I'm very disappointed because Herzog is a Labour Zionist, is not a far leftist, but he's not behaved as a national opposition leader. This was a time where I would have felt he should have joined and supported the Prime Minister, and he would have gained kudos and gained points and support from it. And I think they behaved totally irresponsibly, as the whole electoral process in Israel is totally dysfunctional and terrible.
Let's digress for one moment, because I mentioned that you wrote a very strong piece on what you called this vicious campaign, the vicious media campaign during the election, and that everything about the way the election is being handled, you wrote, has troubled you. Explain to us why.
Largely because you have, the country is going through a national crisis of real dimensions. You would expect responsible politicians here to behave responsibly. Now, for Herzog to complain that Netanyahu failed because he didn't bomb and destroy Hamas, and to make statements of this nature, to say that the responsibility for the breakdown of the Palestinians is largely due to Netanyahu's fault, it's just nonsense. And to say furthermore that the relationship of Obama would be all great if it wasn't for him, that's not fair. I think that the one thing that comes out of all of this is nobody can deny that President Obama has treated our Prime Minister, my Prime Minister, in an appalling manner, in a way that he has not treated rogue states. He has humiliated him and been pretty consistent in a negative approach towards him. And that has not improved over the months. It's got worse and worse. And we're very, very worried about the next 22 months.
I'll come back to that in a moment. Why do you think, is it just pure Israeli politics that somebody like an Isaac Herzog or a Tzipi Livni is willing to engage in this kind of assault on the Prime Minister over the joint session of Congress? Or do you believe that there is some kind of principle that they are committed to?
No, I think it's largely political and consistent with the rest of their campaign, which has been, as I say, we're not discussing issues in Israel at the moment. We're not discussing issues. I mean, the extent of the demonization of the Prime Minister and his wife, the fact that the major newspaper in Israel, other than Yisrael Hayom, Yediot Achronot, has spent nearly every day 5 or 6 pages defaming him in a manner which is unprecedented. I think this is a terrible reflection on us. And I mean, to have a situation, what country in the world would you say the family, the Prime Minister's family, are accumulating wealth by collecting bottle tops and making $5 a week and making that a central issue in the election campaign when we are dealing with issues of life and death, our relationship with the Palestinians, our relationship with the United States and the rest of the world, anti-Semitism. Instead of concentrating on the issues that count and on the economy and the other issues, they've just gone for this, and this is terrible. It's terrible. We have a great country in Israel, but unfortunately when it comes to politics, we're dysfunctional. The other problem we have is a lot of people today don't like Netanyahu. A lot of Israelis don't like him. It comes to certain, what they call use-by date. Like Margaret Thatcher, like Winston Churchill, like all politicians, and they say it's time for a change. But then they look at the alternative and they say, ugh, so we're going to vote with him holding our noses, or we'll vote for these other new parties. And all these other central parties, unfortunately, if you take away Beit Yehudi and Meretz, who are genuine ideological parties, one on the left and one on the hard right, the ones in the centre are all, if I may use it, prostitutes, willing to get votes and then leverage their own position with either side. And that makes the whole electoral system pretty bad. So I am disappointed with Israeli politics.
Incidentally, if you had to guess today, which party, Likud or Labor Zionist Union, which will get more seats, just stam, in and of themselves? Likud or Labor?
It's like a toss-up because there's no real indication. It's zigzagging all the time. My belief is that the inclination of the electorate is such that there's a greater likelihood of Netanyahu becoming the Prime Minister again. And under the circumstances, I must say I would welcome that for the main reason that he has the experience and that I don't consider that the others are good enough. And for that reason, I believe he's likely to come back in, and I think the thrust of the electorate is more towards the right than towards the left. So he's likely to get in, but it's so volatile, you can never tell. And when you have these small parties manoeuvring and adjusting themselves, anything can happen. But I don't think it's going. The probability is Netanyahu, and he's very lucky, because otherwise he would be on the way out.
Mm-hmm. There have been times you've been very complimentary of Netanyahu. Do you still believe in him?
I believe he's the best person at the moment to continue running the country. I believe that, contrary to the criticisms that are being made about him, I believe he behaved enormously positively and in a responsible manner during the war.
Yes, we spoke about that.
And to my mind, that is leadership.
By the end of the war, were Israelis as impressed with Netanyahu as they were in the midst of it?
No. By the end of the war, there were a lot of people, and you had the foreign minister jumping up and down and saying, go and fix them up, we can knock them out, and criticising his own government. I mean, really Planet of the Apes, when you have a foreign minister in the middle of the war criticising his own government's running of the war.
And this was Avigdor Lieberman.
Yeah. And he's now getting his just desserts, I think, because the electorate seems to be turning against him. But I do believe that a lot of people were disappointed because they would have everybody had in their bones, they're willing, let's go and finish them off. And I think it took great leadership and responsibility on his part to realise that we couldn't have, because we would have gone in there, knocked them out, the Americans and the rest of the world would have forced us to go out, and they would have been victors as a result. Not the way it turned out. We got the best possible result of a very unpleasant situation. Mm-hmm. And it's not over. I mean, it's going to come back again, but we're in a much better position today than we've ever been before.
Okay. Let's stay with elections for one moment,
Yep.
and then we'll come back to the relationship between the United States and Israel. The two principal leaders, everybody should understand, are Likud and, again, Labor Zionist Union. Likud led by Netanyahu, Benjamin Netanyahu, and Labor led by Herzog with Tzipi Livni, evidently, correct?
Yes.
And does she have a high degree of visibility on the Israeli scene today?
Well, Likud tries to give her as much visibility as possible because she's not extremely popular.
I see.
And she's quite noisy, but I think it's a bit of it's to some extent a disadvantage for him at the moment. Initially, it gave him a boost to go together
Is
with
it a disadvantage to Herzog?
Yeah.
Yes. By the way, at one point she said she was leaving politics. Then she sort of formed a small party of her own. And now she's once again aligned herself as the number 2 person in a major party. What's this, how do you analyze that?
I'd say that Herzog's a very bad negotiator, and if that's the man that's going to run the country and negotiates to make an alternative prime minister of this woman who was virtually on the way out, that worries me about his ability to lead the country as well.
Okay. In the last election, American Jews witnessed what looked to be like 2 rising stars,
Yes.
Naftali Bennett and Yair Lapid. It seems like Yair Lapid is experiencing what so many Israeli politicians experience. They have their moment in the sun and they expire. The light goes out. What's the story with Yair Lapid?
Yair Lapid is a marvellous person. Had he been foreign minister, we would have had a great foreign minister because he can articulate, he's nice, he's beautiful. But in terms of what I would call political leadership and political responsibility, he's got a lot to learn. And he's quite primitive. Mind you, of all the parties there, he has the best people in his party.
This is Yesh Atid. There will be a future.
They have selected nice people to be on the party. But he himself has been zigzagging so much, people have lost confidence in him. He won't be as bad, he won't collapse as much as people thought, but he certainly won't be in the same position he was before. Probably more going to get like 10 to 11 seats, people predict.
Will he have enough to earn a seat in the cabinet?
He won't get into, he certainly will not be able to get into a cabinet with
Netanyahu,
Netanyahu.
but maybe with Herzog.
Oh, if there was, he would be certainly pushing for Herzog.
Okay. Now, what about Naftali Bennett? He seems to have done well in the last number of years, and if anything, the Jewish Home Party has gained strength, it seems. But what's the real story here?
It has gained strength, and he's extraordinarily articulate, and many people describe him as a young Netanyahu in the making. But he represents, to my mind, an extreme element in the sense that all of us recognize you can't have a Palestinian state today. But to say we want to take over the territories and absorb another few million Arabs, to my mind, that will be the end of the Jewish state. And on that level, a lot of Israelis would run away from him. And he reached a peak where he was getting as high as 15, 16 votes, and he's now sunk back to 11, 12. We'll see. But he's still a very able fellow, extraordinarily able. And if he moves more to the center, he could become a national leader.
Very interesting. Okay, speak again now about Avigdor Lieberman, which you say, again, his political fortunes are on the downturn.
Yes.
But speak about where he stands right now.
We don't know where he stands because he stands everywhere. He's been zigzagging, attacking Netanyahu for not being nice enough to Obama, and then turning around and criticizing him for not being tough enough against the Arabs. I mean, he's been trying to do everything to gain everywhere. And I think he's lost a lot of his natural Russian constituency because they saw this man was going all over the place. And if you look, he had a few capable people. They've all disappeared. I mean, all the people, he's got a new party virtually there. He's just selected them.
Now, he was foreign minister.
Yeah.
Will he have a seat in the cabinet next time?
If he has enough votes, he'll get a seat in the cabinet. But I would hope he'll never be anywhere near foreign minister or, as he demands, defense minister. I would certainly not like to see him in either of those two positions.
Okay.
Because I think he has not been a good foreign minister. Foreign minister, to my mind, is someone that people like. It's a PR job. You've got to present the best. And he's been going out castigating his own government. Now, what sort of foreign minister? Only in Israel do you get this madness.
Moshe Chalon is head of Kulanu.
Yeah.
Is he a force
He's a mystery
to be reckoned with? Mystery man.
Mystery man. People like him, and there is a genuine feeling amongst a lot of young people, to hell with what's going on. We're not going to have a peace process, so forget about it. We should only be concentrating on social issues, and this man will project social issues and push forward. So he may get quite a nice number of votes. He would naturally be, I think, in a Netanyahu government, but also capable of jumping on the other side if it means it was necessary.
Okay. Now, you said Meretz had a legitimate ideology led by Zahava Galon. So where's Meretz today?
Meretz far left. And, it's far left. It
And
is what I call the delusional
segment of
left.
the Israeli population does Meretz now speak for?
It speaks for the people who I would describe as a delusional left, and a lot of people who are unhappy. And she's a very charismatic woman. The leader is very charismatic, comes out and speaks well, and she's got a following among some of the younger people. But it's a small party, and at one stage is also in danger of losing, not getting to the threshold.
Now, there are a whole little bunch of ultra-Orthodox, what they call religious parties, most notably Shas and Aryeh Deri.
It's good. Good news there.
Tell me why.
Because they're going down. I believe that Shas was a negative force. I believe the rabbis of Shas are extreme. The word fundamentalist is the wrong word, but they are non-worldly, and they are not the sort of people that should be leading a religious revival in Israel. And to have them there in the position where they can make or break, my only worry is that in a Netanyahu government, they will again have power. But I don't think they'll have the same power they had before, particularly now with Shas going down. And Yishai is different. I mean, he's got this right-wing extremist in there, but Yishai himself is moving them towards Zionism, which is quite good.
You've said, by the way, at other times that you feel that the official ultra-Orthodox rabbinate that basically runs marriage, divorce,
Yeah.
the personal life, personal religious life of the State of Israel. You're very disillusioned with and upset with the institution of the rabbinate, correct?
The chief rabbinate should be dissolved if I had my way, because I think the chief rabbinate is a force for negativism. It is controlled by the most extreme elements, and whilst I have nothing against people living a life that they want, their own life, but to try to impose that on the country. I mean, Chief Rabbi Lau, for example, made a deal with Haredim before he got elected that he would not move in the conversion field without getting their approval. Now, there is a desperate need for reform there, desperate. And religion and state is a very serious issue because, strangely enough, there's a religious revival taking place in Israel. You have a much greater sense of religiosity amongst the Jewish people today than you had 30 or 40 years ago. At the same time, you have such an uninspiring rabbinical leadership by and large. It's frightening. And they are all being groomed in a situation where their counterparts, see, a Haredi counterpart in Europe, many of these people had university educations. When you think of some of the Haredi rabbis, they had education. They were Haredi, but they had an education. They were worldly. These people, if they come to Israel and send their children to yeshiva, they go really back into a primitive situation where they don't have any external impact whatsoever on the world at large. Mm-hmm. It's a terribly frightening situation. You ask yourself how many rabbis have had a high school education? Not too many.
Mm-hmm. By the way, I want our audience to understand, you're an Orthodox Jew.
Yes.
You're committed and an observant Jew.
Yeah.
And you still don't want the chief rabbinate as an institution in the state
Absolutely.
of Israel.
If it's not going to be a positive institution the way it was in the days of Herzog and Goren and the religious Zionists who were looking and using that as a vehicle to try to bring halacha, into play and blend it in with the requirements of modern state, if not, get rid of it.
All right, we went through the parties, and the overall question I want you to address is, do you see the Israeli electorate moving to the right? Is Israeli society as a whole moving right in a way that either bothers you or should or could bother American Jewry?
Look, the word right and left is extremely misleading when you talk about Israelis, because right and left in terms of Palestinians is not the expression. There's a general recognition that the Palestinian Authority is only marginally different from Hamas, that their ultimate objective is the end of the Jewish state, that Abbas, with all the nice statements he makes occasionally when he comes overseas, is basically totally intransigent, and if he wanted to do something, he wouldn't. That the man extols murderers and terrorists and has built up a society which is a culture of death. To my mind, this has made the electorate move away. But it doesn't move away from saying we're going to be able to find an accommodation. They're saying we can't have a situation where the Habima Theatre will be bringing tunnels as we had in Gaza. And that's what they would have, because apart from other considerations, there's every probability that given a Palestinian state, Hamas would take it over as well. So there's a question of security, and this goes beyond ideology. And most of us believe that it's not on, that a two-state solution is something we dream of, we want to separate ourselves from them, but as long as our security is going to be jeopardized, you've just got to put it off, try to do on an interim basis what we can to get closer, to try to build up, to give them a sense of feeling that it's in their interest to have peace. But the society is so hateful against us at the moment, it's very, very difficult. So when you talk about right and left, to that extent, yes, moved towards the right. If you're talking about the relationship with the Palestinians, but it's not right and left. It's a different concept. In terms of social issues, I think if there was social issues, they would be moving more towards the Labour Zionists if it was just looking at that. Mm-hmm. And that's a great shame, because I was hoping that Herzog, with the illustrious family background and the Zionist background he has, would be different. But somehow or other, if you look at some of the people in his party, mind you, every party, the right wing, Likud has some people who are far right as well. I don't think anybody can vote for a party and say, I'm really happy with the whole party. Everybody that votes for anything in Israel today is going to hold their nose to some extent because there's some aspect. He's got to take the best of the worst.
Mm-hmm.
But that's life.
That is life. But there's some of that here in the United States as well.
Of course.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But you make a very important point here about left and right. And I sometimes feel that those who charge Israel with moving to the right don't understand it. It really is.
Absolutely.
It is really now what is the Israeli mainstream. And what you said, I want to make sure people heard you. Again, you're an Orthodox Jew. If you could have an ideal situation, wouldn't you want all of Eretz Yisrael to be the state of Israel?
Oh, I'd love it, but not if it meant
just
not.
a minute. Of course, that's the ideal. And at the same time, if there were a Palestinian entity honestly willing to live side by side with the state of Israel, would you as an Orthodox Jew be willing to share the land?
Immediately.
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 Okay.
No question.
And I continue to say, and sometimes people who are left, but I consider myself a Jewish liberal.
Yeah.
I don't consider this anything unliberal about what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But there are those who are, quote, on the left who say to me, no, the problem is Israel doesn't want a two-state solution. They're not willing to share the land. My experience, Izzy, with you and with countless Israelis, is that they say the following, almost with a shedding a tear.
Yes.
If I could share it, I would share
Yes.
it in a moment.
Yeah.
But there's nobody to share it
That's
with.
the issue.
And I'm not about to put my children's life, my grandchildren,
Absolutely.
and myself. I'm not,
Absolutely.
And I look around and I say, give me one piece of evidence
Yeah.
that there is in the Palestinian world today, or the Arab world, but the Palestinian world, any sign that they have moved from Khartoum in 1967, September 67, when the Arab League says no negotiation, no recognition, no peace.
Absolutely.
Show me some. Don't tell me what Abbas says. Show me one
Absolutely.
thing.
Absolutely. And I tell you what, I think that Netanyahu would give his right hand to be able to leave a legacy of a separation and a division, and that people don't understand that.
No, they don't.
But I genuinely, and I know him, and I can tell you he would do it tomorrow. He would even, I believe, make a coalition with other parties, a national, if he could find a situation, which he can't.
Okay, and yet there are politicians who vilify him
Of course.
for not being willing to make the concessions necessary.
Knowing fully well that if they're in a position of responsibility, they would
couldn't
never
either.
dare do
Absolutely.
it. And that's the problem. That's the irresponsibility. If we only had a, in the old days, a member of Knesset would think about the national interest, not just scoring a political
Are you
point.
romanticizing?
A little bit. The old Mapai establishment were in many respects more responsible than what we have today.
Mm-hmm. What is true, without any question, is that when Begin was in the opposition party,
Ah, yes.
he would never speak a word of criticism when he went abroad.
Look at Herzog. He goes to a security conference in Munich a couple of weeks ago and accuses his prime minister of being so partisan he's prepared to sell the country in order to promote his political interests. And he says this outside. To me, this is just unspeakable.
What I'm also told is that even if Herzog gets a few more seats than Netanyahu, still Netanyahu will have a better chance of creating a 61 coalition group than Herzog.
Yeah.
Do you agree?
Absolutely. But it's no guarantees, but I do agree. The odds are in his favor still.
Okay, so the likelihood is Netanyahu will be again the next prime minister of Israel, and he has now served longer than any other prime minister of Israel.
Other than Ben Gurion, he will have served, yes.
Which is amazing, is it not?
Yeah.
We come back now to the beginning of the discussion. From all you know, and by the way, when you come to America, you speak to everybody. From all you know, do you worry for bipartisan support in Congress for the state of Israel?
I do worry about it.
Tell me why.
because I believe that there are substantial changes taking place on the far left of the Democratic Party. They're absorbing the left liberal negative images of Israel, which are part and parcel of a left liberal European scene. And it's a small element, but it's a growing element which was never there beforehand. And I believe that bipartisanship is of enormous importance. But bipartisanship, people should remember, is important because it's a means by which we can achieve the support of the United States. It's not an end in itself. And people seem to forget it's not an end in itself. To my mind, the Iranian issue, and going on record on the Iranian issue, is more important and will still keep the majority, I hope, of the Democrats. Will still stay on side and will not be influenced by that. For goodness sake, you can have a difference with a power without a bust-up. We've had many differences with America beforehand, but never has there been a political administration which has been so vicious.
Is that true?
Not allowing us to express our viewpoints, in trying to stop us from expressing
I'm sorry,
viewpoint.
are you telling me that you believe this is the nadir of U.S.-Israeli relationships between presidents and prime ministers? There have been some horrific moments.
Yes.
You know,
Both
Ford and
with
Rabin,
Reagan and Ford,
when Shamir, even
yeah.
Eisenhower.
Yes.
There have been very bad times. I sometimes wonder whether we have a very short memory, and whatever's going on is either the best or the worst.
You've never had a situation of a president, forgive me as an Israeli saying this, a president who, to my mind, has somewhat of a third world outlook towards us. And that is something that we've never had in the United States beforehand. And my view is, when he can get up and refuse to express the word Islamic fundamentalism in relation to terrorism, there's something basically wrong. Mm-hmm. And for us, it's an enormously difficult situation. It's not just personal with him and Netanyahu. Personalities may kind of accentuate it, but there's a difference of outlook which is frightening, and much of his administration is like that. When I look at the situation where he can get up and talk about what happened in France and not even make that a Jewish issue at the kosher supermarket, I mean, there's something very, very wrong. And when he seems to be more inclined towards the Muslim Brotherhood than he is towards the Egyptian autocracy. I mean, where are we going? We have a very, very worrying situation. My real nightmare is that, A, he has to do this, and I believe he's going to do a magnificent speech, and he's going to go out of his way to thank the Obama administration for the good things they've done for Israel.
Netanyahu
Security,
will.
yeah. He'll do a brilliant speech, and I hope he'll win most of the people back. I hope so. But I still think his objective of speaking up about Iran now and using the Congress when he has this opportunity is something that can't be taken away. And here I find, again, and a lot of your viewers will be disappointed with me, I find great disappointment in the American Jewish leadership in this context.
Well, let's go to leadership now.
Okay.
I want to read a piece from your November 2014 column about American Jewish leadership. This is what you wrote. With considerable regret and notwithstanding notable exceptions, I believe that today the major leaders within the American Jewish establishment are failing to stand up and be counted, despite chilling signals that the United States administration is about to abandon Israel. Then you wrote in 2015, in February, American Jews claim that they live in a unique democratic country and enjoy full equality. Yet, whereas most Americans have no hesitation in criticizing their president when they disagree with his policies, the traditionally feisty and outspoken American Jewish leaders seem fearful to criticize their president even in the most respectful terms. This, even after Obama's repeatedly and crudely appalling behavior aimed at humiliating his ally, the Israeli prime minister, in direct contrast to his servility to representatives of rogue states, including Iran. Now, Izzy, those are very strong words.
I stand by them.
Okay. First, do you seriously worry now, because this was written, the first part I read was written in November. Do you seriously worry now that the American administration is about to, your words, abandon Israel?
I'm worried where we're going. The sound bites from the administration and the threats and the intimidation suggest that they're not going to do the right thing by us the next 22 months, and I'm extremely worried. And in a situation like that, I am disappointed that the American Jewish leadership has not respectfully stood up and defended.
What would you have liked them to do or have said?
I would like them at least to get up when he treats our Prime Minister in such an abysmal manner, to respectfully suggest that he's not doing the right thing and the Jewish community are distressed with it. I would expect at least some of them to perhaps say, please understand, we are worried about the Iranian situation. There is not a question of partisanship. He is trying. Get a few of them, not a single person other than Mort Klein and the ZOA, who are regarded on the, what I would call the, he gets offended if I call him a hawk, on the hard line of Jewish politics. But the mainstream has been absolutely silent, and this is unheard of. Completely silent. And there have been some terrible things, not even taking him up on the way he handles the Islamic situation. You have a situation where Dershowitz, who's a good guy, but a Democrat and a left-wing Democrat, and he supported Obama all the way, he comes out and says things that the Jewish leadership are not willing to say.
Yes, Dershowitz has been very critical of the president recently.
It took guts. He made the Chamberlain analogy where he really dropped it.
Mm-hmm. So you wish that those who are leading major American institutions today had said respectfully,
yeah,
we feel you are in some way off base in this or that,
yeah,
and said it publicly.
Yes.
And they haven't.
They haven't.
By and large, they haven't. It's not like it's not my place to defend them, but I think if people you and I both know,
yeah,
and by the way, I respect and like.
Yes, me too.
If they were at this table, they would try to say to you, "You're not being fair to us," and they would try to give you examples. So that, for example, I had Ken Jacobson, the Deputy National Director of the ADL, and initially, Abe Foxman, the National Director of ADL, was very critical of Bibi for coming to speak before Congress. The ADL now has said we're taking a somewhat different position. We think he handled it wrong, sort of what you said at the beginning of our discussion. He didn't handle it right. He could have been more politically astute in how he handled it. But now that he's coming, we support him, and we want bipartisan support for the Prime Minister speaking to Congress. And they've gone on record saying that. Now, that's not criticizing President Obama, but it is making a statement in public.
It's an improvement on what he did, because I've known Abe Fox for many years, and we've had a close relationship, and I've seen him on this visit, and I feel that what he did initially was totally out of place, and he paved the way for the damage control he's now trying to introduce, and I'm glad he's doing the right thing now at this late stage. But the reality is there's a fear of criticizing the president, which is it's not American. Americans are openly critical of their politicians, including their president, and especially respectful for how on earth can you expect a president to be listening to us properly if we just say we're doing this behind doors, when we know, everybody knows, that they have very little access to the administration or the president. They should at least be showing and directing. I know from the communications I get from my emails that there's a groundswell underneath there that certainly is very unhappy at the silence of the leaders.
Mm-hmm. I'm asking you now for your instinct. If American Jewish leaders are not speaking out, why is that? What's behind that, Izzy?
Because there's a DNA amongst American Jewish liberals that they cannot take on the Democratic Party. And when it is an African American leader, it becomes even more difficult for them to take him up and to confront him. But I believe if this was a Republican, you'd be hearing them much louder than today.
You may be right, but I want you to react to this for me.
Sure.
I think Jews, on some level, you talk about DNA, are less secure than they want to
Absolutely.
portray. And that there is a feeling that they must maintain access to the White House, and that to criticize any president of any party too strongly would jeopardize their standing and would push them away. And it's not simply that they want to be at the candle, when the menorah is lit, they want to be in the White House. That's a ceremonial event.
I understand, yes.
It's not irrelevant, but that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is they worry. They worry. They want to be, I'm now using a very harsh term, Izzy, court Jews.
Stadlanut.
I think there's some more, I fear that there is more of that than I want there to be. That there is a feeling among some in the Jewish leadership that Jews should only go so far in publicly criticizing the president. It comes back, by the way, in a strange way, and you make reference to this in your piece, to what Stephen Wise did when he said, don't make, we will play Roosevelt's game.
Yes.
We won't make World War II a Jewish war. Now, I think Stephen Wise also believed it was going to be helpful to the Jews.
Yeah.
But I worry now that there's a little bit of a court mentality. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely. My view is American Jews have always told me we're different from Jews in the diaspora. We are not in galut. We are genuine diaspora. And I believe that their behavior now is that of a classical galut community, which is very saddening because they've always been feisty and active and aggressive when it comes to looking after Jewish interests. But on this, there's a fear, a real fear. And it's weird. And I know the feeling because I was head of a Jewish community. Of course, Australia is a smaller place. But I took on prime ministers one after another. And I had a lot of people in the community saying, oh. But ultimately, we gained their respect as long as it could be seen. I was not playing a political game for either party, but looking after Jewish interests. There's a respect. And I think that's where we're missing out, because if they don't speak up, they won't have, I believe they're a waning political influence. That's my great fear, and it's very important for Jews to retain their political influence, but I think they're waning, and that is a worry.
Izzy, how critical is U.S. support of the State of Israel to Israel's existence?
Absolutely critical. We need the United States, and I don't see a danger of a total breakdown happening. And if you look at the figures and statistics, the overwhelming majority of Americans are still very pro-Israel. You have evangelicals, which are more passionate about Israel than most Jews. All of these things put together, I think, the relationship stays there. But the next 22 months worry me, because if your president is obsessed with achieving his foreign policy objectives and tries to force us to going into indefensible borders, we are going to have a nightmare, because we're going to have to say no. And then he's going to give a wink, perhaps, to the Europeans, and then they start with sanctions and Security Council resolutions. It's going to be a very hard time for us.
You seem to say in one of your pieces that you could conceive of, that you worry that there would come a time when the U.S. would not veto a sanction of Israel in the Security Council.
Yes.
That is a thought that occurs to you.
It's been hinted at by the administration to different people on different occasions. Hinted, not said, but it's been hinted. And it's quite feasible.
And you also wrote, I don't want to end without asking you to talk about European Jewry. And you have written a lot now about how you feel about that. And the most controversial issue is suddenly Prime Minister Netanyahu saying publicly to the Jews of France or the Jews of Denmark, it's time to leave. You should come to Israel because where you're living is not safe. And there are those who are arguing that is over the top, that it is premature, way premature, and that it's one thing for Jews to make Aliyah out of some positive desire to be part of the Jewish enterprise in the state of Israel. But it's another thing to say what Vladimir Jabotinsky was saying in the early 30s, if you don't leave, there's going to be a black cloud that will envelop you. He could not even conceive of the Holocaust. But ultimately, Jabotinsky was warning Jews that for their safety, they had to leave. It sounds like Benjamin Netanyahu has done the same thing when he tells French Jewry, you should all pack up and come to Israel. After Copenhagen, you should just pack up and leave. What's your sense of this flap?
My sense is there'll always be Jewish communities in Europe, but the cornerstone of Zionism has always been Aliyah. And the Prime Minister of Israel, in a situation like that, were not to say, listen guys, come here. We welcome you here if you want to come here. I think if he didn't do that, he'd be remiss. He certainly had the support of the people of Israel when he did that. And some of the Jewish leaders that complained miserably about that, to my mind, will have cause to look back. Europe is a cemetery for Jews, as far as I'm concerned. When you have kids going to school or going to synagogue, surrounded by army, if that's the sort of Jewish life that you can talk about and you can't then say, listen fellas, it's time to go. When you have that situation, when you have a demographic situation with Islamic elements, which is going to become greater and greater, and they're going to be more and more powerful, more influential on their communities. When you've got the left turning against them, when you have this environment, sure, you've got a nice French Prime Minister who's a great guy, says the right things, but by and large, the word Islamophobia, they're more concerned about Islamophobia than about Jews. In a situation like that, Aliyah is an obligation. And sure, I'd like to see many people come primarily because they want to come to Israel, not because they're forced to come to Israel. But Israel was not built on that, and I can assure you that if we're going to wait for Europeans to come because they love to come to Israel and not take into account the sort of life that they bring their children up. What sort of a life is it to be a Jew when you're a pariah in a society? And they are pariahs. They can't go to normal schools. They've got to be guarded everywhere. And now, with more and more of these people coming backwards, jihadis coming back and targeting Jews, it's not just going to be France, it's all over. My view is, get out now. They should go, those that want to. And if they can't, they should think of their children and encourage their younger children. It's not easy to make Aliyah for a lot of people. They can't afford to. And Israel has to do a lot more to see that they're integrated properly. Although if you hear the French around us in Israel now, you've certainly got a lot more than the statistics show. But I believe that this is a time when we should be encouraging them to come in a positive way. Mm-hmm. And I say, kol hakavod to the Prime Minister saying it. He's obliged to do that. Sharon did it, he did it, and any Israeli Prime Minister is going to do it. And that's what he's there for. That's what Zionism is all about. Aliyah, particularly when situations arise and things are going bad. I mean, to say we should stay there because it'll be a victory for Hitler, what nonsense is that? Stay in Europe and bring up children so that they're ashamed of being Jewish and have to run away from it all, can't wear a kippah, can't wear a Jewish symbol, frightened of going in the streets. This is terrible. It's a disgusting environment. And I hope as many Jews as possible wake up, and those that can will come. There'll always be Jews there. We should also do what we can to help those that stay behind. That's one doesn't exclude the other, but we should encourage the best of them to come. And I hope we'll get more American Jews coming too. Mm-hmm.
Izzy, do you ever worry about it happening here in America?
Yes.
Really?
I tell you what worries me in America. The campuses are getting to a point now where, in my opinion, it's never been as bad as it is today. And it's getting worse. And the worst part of it is that you have a number of Jews at the forefront of the anti-Semitism here on the campuses. I'll say it further. You have a number of institutions that are supposed to be promoting Jewish values that are promoting anti-Jewish values. And some of the Hillel groups are very questionable in how they're behaving. All of these things here on the campus and the huge pressure on many Jews to play a low profile or find themselves intimidated, it's a very worrying situation. All I can say is, in the context of all of this, you look at Israel like a beacon of light and you feel a lot better, because without Israel, I shudder what Jewish life would be. Israel is the insurance policy for Jews all over the world, and Israel, despite its crappy politicians, Israel is a great country and developing magnificently on so many levels. You have to walk in the streets and see what's going on and feel the vibrancy of the culture. And, you know, and Israelis moan and are the greatest masochists in the world. But, you know, they're amongst the happiest people in the world. When you take the polls, Israel is one of the happiest people in the world, because you're part of a society which, with all its weaknesses, is developing. And it's a miracle. It's the greatest miracle of our times. And that's kind of, you've got to keep reminding ourselves of that when we see all the terrible things going on around the world against us.
You know, I appreciate all of your analysis and all of my words that I hope people understand come from deep inside me, of how wonderful your observations of Jewish life are, your insights of Jewish life are. And by the way, Izzy, it's not about your being right 100% of the time, but what you are 100% of the time is a caring, committed Jew who makes us think. I hope everybody who's watching L'chaim on JBS makes sure that they go to, and they can either, you know, Google your name, Isi Leibler, or go to Candidly Speaking from Jerusalem, and they receive every week, and it's really even more than once a week, your columns, because they are always thoughtful, insightful, thought-provoking, and have such Jewish soul. And I love you very, very much, and it's always wonderful to sit at this table with you. You're one of the most dearest people to me in the world.
Thank you. You really honor me. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much. The thoughts of Isi Leibler, whose weekly columns appear in the Jerusalem Post and Israel Hayom. I hope you found these observations thought-provoking and enlightening. As always, Isi Leibler tells it like it is and challenges thought. As always, I invite you to be in touch with me with any thoughts you may have in response to the ideas expressed by Isi Leibler. Please email me, write me, post on our Facebook wall, or tweet me. I look forward to reading your thoughts. And so until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. L'chaim, my friends, to life.
L'chaim is a presentation of Jewish education in media.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS, the Jewish Broadcasting Service, with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the JBS homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to Jem, to Jim, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.